So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about finishing now. Okay, we've gotten to the point where we're ready to finish our guitars, and I want to show you a few things about sanding and wood before we start getting into the different types of finishes and stains and dyes and the actual application of these, and then we're going to go into wet sanding and buffing, okay, and also airbrushing and things like that. So right now this body is close to being ready to be finished. It's not quite ready, and we have to make sure that before we start finishing any part of the guitar, whether it's a neck, body, whatever that we're building, that the body or neck, whatever, is actually ready to be finished. And what determines whether it's ready to be finished or not is the sanding. Okay, when you are building a guitar, there is tons and tons and tons of sanding, and I'm going to get into the proper way to sand here in just a minute. But ultimately, whatever you end up seeing while the guitar is not finished, you are going to see that when it's finished. Also, any imperfections will be amplified as soon as you put a clear coat on. So what I'm going to do is let's take this body right here, okay? And if I hold this up right here, okay, you can see this line that will show up in the finish, where you can see this small amount of like fuzz, that'll show up in the finish. This right here will show up in the finish. This little nick will show up in the finish. We've got the same thing here. This is from where the guitar was resting on its side like this against the table. Those things we're going to see on the finish when this gets done. The sanding is not complete, okay? If I lift this up and then I look at it and I come over here, this portion right here, that needs to be sanded. That will show up, okay? And let me show you the proper way of sanding, and from there I'm going to show you more reasons why it's really important to have everything absolutely perfect before you decide to put your finish on. So what we have here is actually a neck that I broke off of that one guitar in the other video talking about wood glues and wood selection. And what we're going to do here is we're going to sand a portion of this, and there's another portion we're just going to leave alone. We're not going to touch it at all, okay? And the way that this works, sandpaper, how it's categorized, has to do with the size of the grit, okay? The smaller the number, the larger the grit. The higher the number, the smaller the grit, okay? Now, in this case, we have this piece of sandpaper right here. We look at the back, and it says 60, okay? And depending on what country you're in, sometimes the way that they number these is a little bit different, but it still applies the same way. It's still the lower the number, the rougher it is, the higher the number, the smoother it is. But we're dealing with 60 grit. This is very rough. 60 grit is used for when you're trying to take a lot of material off, you know, at the beginning stages. This would be good for you trying to round over an edge, something like this, to get the majority of that off. But you wouldn't stop with this. You would go to 80 grit afterwards, and right here on this old piece we can see it says 80, and then from here you would take this and you would sand that, okay? And then we wouldn't stop at 80. From here we have a piece of 150 grit. Okay, and it's starting to feel a lot smoother, but we wouldn't stop there. This is a piece of 220. Typically after 220 you can call it good for the majority of finishes, okay? But you'll also notice that what I'm doing is see, now this feels very smooth right now, okay? But you'll also notice that I'm sanding with the grain, okay? I'm not sanding against the grain. If the grain is traveling in this direction, that's the direction that you want to sand it, because this is the direction of the wood fibers. This is the direction it grows, okay? If I sand it this way, it's the exact opposite of the wood fibers, and it's going to tear into them, and it's going to leave scratches that you'll never be able to get out. And this will become more apparent here in a second. So I end up having my 60 grit. I'm going to sand crossways, okay? Right here. Now if I move this and I bring this to the camera close enough, you should see some pretty serious scratches right there, okay? Even if I take 220 to that, and I take 80, 150, 220, you'll always be able to see subtle scratches in it, okay? That's bad, okay? Where if I take this and I go in the direction of the grain, you'll see that there really are no scratches, okay? This is one of the reasons why when you're trying to clean a fretboard or you're sanding a fretboard and there's frets in it, you don't want to go this direction while doing it, because you're going to put scratches in your fretboard, okay? And generally you kind of have to go back and forth. If you're going to do that, you fold your sandpaper, and if this is the fret, you butt up against it. That's if you absolutely have to sand, okay? You shouldn't have to if you did everything right, okay? This tears into it considerably. This does not. This leaves a rough finish. This one doesn't so much, okay? So always go with the grain. Sometimes you'll use something like an orbital sander, okay, that uses a pad like this. And what it does is it kind of turns this way and vibrates at the same time, okay? Now, what this can do is it can actually end up leaving circle marks in the wood, okay? I don't know if I can get it with this, okay, but we can see a little bit there, okay? And sometimes it'll leave little swirls, okay? And it's really important that if you are using a random orbital sander, you always go up to at least 220. And before you decide to start finishing it, you need to do another test, which I'll show you here in a second. But once again, we have our 60 grit. This is sideways right here, right? At a right angle. This is with it, with the grain. Now what I'm going to do is right here, I'm going to sand with the grain, 60 grit, because this is all going to come into play right here in a second. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 80 grit and I'm going to do the same thing only in this area. And this will take out some of the larger scratches that the 60 had left behind. Okay, from here we go to our 150. And also, the older the sandpaper is, in other words, the more you use it, the grit starts dissipating on it. So this 80 grit, this has actually been used before. So this is probably actually closer to maybe like 120 grit or something along those lines, because the grit itself has been worn down. Keep that in mind. Sometimes you have to change the pads, even though you can feel the grit. Sometimes it's just not going to sand the way you want. This is a new 150, and it's taking more off than this 80 grit because this 80 is old. Okay, but we've done that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our 220, and we're going to come back here like this. And you're going to see why I'm showing you this, okay? Because this stuff is really important. Okay, so we have this one that we have sanded at a right angle to the grain. We have this one where it's 60 grit, but we didn't go beyond it. Then we have this one that's 220. Well, first of all, this feels much smoother than this does. Definitely more smooth than this. Anything that happens here, even though you cannot see it, will show up in the finish. Now let's say this is something like a fretboard and you want it to be even smoother. Then you go to things like 600. You go to like your 400 grit, you know, or 320 after the 220. Do your 400, do your 600. You can even go up to 800 or 1200 if you want to. When you start getting into the areas of 1200, 1500, 2000 grit, you're getting into the areas of things like steel wool. Because steel wool, ultimately, you should think of it as a sandpaper, but a very, very fine grit. Okay? So before I get into the next portion, which is actually showing you what happens when you start staining and doing stuff like that, when you haven't been really careful with your sanding, we need to talk a little bit more about different types of sandpaper. We have sandpaper like this, which is typical for raw wood. This is good stuff to use for raw wood. Typically, almost everything that you're going to do, 220 is the last that you have to go. It's the highest that you have to do. You don't always have to start at 60. Sometimes you can just use 220 and that's enough. You don't have to, it just depends on how rough the wood is and how smooth you're trying to get it. But generally 220 is good enough, okay? This, it's black, okay? Hopefully you can tell that that's black. This is what's known as, you can use it either wet or dry, okay? This is the type of stuff that you would use when you're doing wet sanding, okay? Because the paper doesn't fall apart on you when it gets wet. And also, you can clean the material out of the grit real well. Like right here we see some wood dust, okay? If we were wet sanding, we could keep putting this in water and a lot of this material would just kind of come right off of that. But even though that we might be doing this with wet sanding, it still wears after a while. And it starts becoming, this 600 would start acting more like 1000 grit, okay? Just as it starts getting older. You have to kind of keep that in mind, keep an eye on things during the time that you're sanding, because you're like, man, it's just like I'm working on this forever, it's not getting any smoother. Like right now, this part feels really smooth. That one not so much, okay? But you need to keep an eye on that. Also make sure you use the right sandpaper for the right job. This one right here, you can use wet or dry. There's different types of sandpapers that are like this that actually are kind of like rubberized, and you can clean them and they last a really long time. And this is 320 grit. So, you know, if you wanted to come in here and do whatever, okay, that's what this is. Typically, when I'm doing my wet sanding and buffing, I use wet, dry sandpaper like this. Same stuff as I mentioned before. You can soak this in water for a while. This is 1500 grit. You get really good sandpaper for finishing your guitar, not the wood finishing, but the finishing of the finish itself, the clear coat, from places that sell automotive paint. Okay, and I'm not really talking about places like Kragen or O'Reilly Auto Parts or AutoZone. You can probably find some there, but places that actually sell all the paints to the paint shops. There's a few here in San Diego that I go to get the majority of my painting products. But that's where you can get a lot of this stuff. It's expensive, I'm not going to lie. Good sandpaper, good paints, and everything like that are expensive, but it's well worth it. Before we kind of go any further, let's talk a little bit about sanding blocks. Now, this is just a piece of MDF that I cut out. And many people would use something like this as a sanding block. And you can, but you cannot use it as soon as it's done being cut out. What happens is, on these edges right here, let's say this is the side that we're going to put our sandpaper. If we take a piece of sandpaper and we try to wrap it around this, like so, okay, if we get it and we wrap it around so we can hold it like this, what happens is on the outside where the sandpaper wraps around it, it actually is not a perfectly straight right angle. It kind of dips, right? And during the time that you're sanding, you're going to be getting more action right here and right here, and it's not really a level surface. So what you want to do is, after you get your piece that's cut like this, okay, grab it and hold it at an angle, okay, and what you want to do is you kind of want to round over these edges, okay, something like this. It doesn't have to be a major round over, but you want these edges to not be perfectly at a right angle, because if you do that, you won't really have a really nice flat surface. Okay, so now that that's done, when I take this and I wrap it around, it'll actually end up setting flat against the block. So when you're sanding, you're not going to be getting a lot of the more sanding here than in this area. Okay. Now you can use your hands to sand things, but what will end up happening if you're not real careful is you're going to start getting dips and strange things like that. You can usually tell when somebody's been doing a lot of sanding by hand without using a block, because it's not perfectly flat. You can find dips because people have a tendency to sand, and then they just start working in one area like this for a long time, and it creates a dip. You'll see that a lot. Okay, so when it comes to wet sanding, and this looks disgusting, but this is what I use for wet sanding. It's basically a foam block, and this is a very hard foam. One side is harder than the other. This block I get from the same place that I get my automotive paints from. They're about $5 or $6. They last forever. But what this does is it gives you a nice, fairly flat surface that you can kind of also bend if you need it. But it's just a more gentle block for sanding. Now, when it comes to doing wet sanding, I guess I could use something like this, but it's usually not a good idea because this can be too aggressive on corners on these edges, like I mentioned, and that's why I rounded them over. But it can still be a little aggressive. This is better. It's definitely a little bit more flowing, I guess is the best way to put it, or a little bit more gradual when it comes to the actual sanding portion. And also, because it's foam, when you push on it, it's not all the force of your muscle and stuff going into the wood. Some of this compresses. It kind of controls the depth also of that grit getting into whatever you're sanding. Okay, usually, though I only use this really for clear coats. Okay, this I use for wood, and I use for primer. How do you know if it's really ready to be finished, right? Well, you can tell by the way it feels. You can tell by the way it looks. But for just as a way to make sure everything is just right, things won't pop up that you weren't expecting, you can take a little bit of water or alcohol, okay, put it on a rag, and then rub it over the wood, okay, and that's what it's going to look like with a clear coat. Okay, now what I've done right here is going to cause the wood fibers to come up, but look at how you can see those scratches right there real bad. You can see that it's darker, but where it was really smooth, it's very light, right? This is the area we didn't sand. So the sanding does affect how much pigment or how much dye or how much clear coat or whatever, how it bonds to it. It's going to change the way that the end result is. So typically, I wouldn't go with 600 on wood like this. I would only go to 220. And it would leave a nice finish. You wouldn't see any of the sanding marks. It would absorb, but it wouldn't reject it. You wouldn't see so much like this. Even though this is very clear, this looks closer to the actual wood, right? Something to keep in mind. Now, another thing to keep in mind is we just put water on this, okay, a thin coat of water. And what that's going to do is everywhere that we just sanded, all of those wood fibers are going to absorb the water, and now they're going to come up. They're going to shoot up just like this. So when this dries, this area that felt smooth before is going to feel real rough. And then from there, we only have to knock it down once again with some 600, 320, something along those lines, and at least we know that it'll be ready to finish. If there's any scratches in it, this water is going to bring it out. We're going to see things like this on any type of scratch. You'll see that the portion that was smooth is even getting lighter. It's drying faster because it didn't absorb as much water as the areas that were really, really rough. The rough areas have more surface area, and the water can get in from a lot of different avenues. This is really smooth, okay? So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and kind of put this to the side. Here's a piece of maple. This has not been sanded. This has only been run through the planer, okay? But once again, I want to show you that by taking some water and running it over the maple, if we just did a clear coat on this, this is what it would look like when it was finished, if we just did a clear, okay? And it's very subtle, very subtle. But you'll see that when you do stuff like this, some of the grain pops out more. And it's even more apparent when you're doing things like, let's grab this piece of flame maple veneer. Now right now the flame maple, you know, it's pretty apparent. We can see some pretty cool flame right there. But if we ended up taking our rag and we go over this, give it a second to absorb, okay, it pops a little bit more. And that's going to end up telling you, once again, how this is going to look when it is clear coated. We were talking about sanding with the grain, okay? And in this case, let's look at this guitar body right here. In areas like this, where we can see that this is kind of dark because this has been burned a little bit during the time that this was being routed, this will show up, right? This is going to show up in the clear coat. And then this particular guitar gets clear coated. It doesn't have a finish on it. But if I go like this, you'll see that that still shows up. It's not as bad, but it does seem to be a little darker than really it should be. If I come over here and I look at this section, this looks like this has been sanded this way, okay? In fact, I can guarantee it has been. Let me put some water on that, and it kind of disappears a little bit, okay? But you'll notice that the water changes everything. This is how dark it's going to be as soon as water hits, as soon as the clear coat hits it. You wouldn't guess that just by looking at it. But this is what happens with the clear coat. We come up here on top, okay, onto the maple up here, and you'll see, once again, how that jumps out and it turns yellow, okay? There's a huge difference between that and that. Huge difference, okay? The clear coat is going to make it look like this, but it's even going to be amplified even more, okay? So remember the water trick? Because I did this, I'm going to have to lightly sand it though, okay? We also have to keep in mind about end grain and the surface of the guitar, right? Something like this, the top here, you know, it's going to absorb any type of dye or stain very equal, okay? It's going to absorb it equally. When we start getting closer to these edges, it might grab a little bit more of it and it might become darker. If I turn the guitar over, okay, and this would be like the top, let's just say we don't have a maple on this, and I put some water back here, okay, you'll see that the color of that has darkened, okay, and it looks nice and everything along those lines, but it's not real dark because this is not end grain, okay? This is end grain, and you're going to notice that when I hit this with water, it becomes darker than this, okay? Is it dramatic? Sometimes. On this particular piece, no, but sometimes it's very dramatic, okay? And what you want to do to avoid things like that is you want to use a wood conditioner. And that's if you're planning on doing things like staining or something along those lines. You want to make, if you're just doing a clear coat, don't really worry about it so much. You can if you want, but you can use a sanding sealer first. This will also make sure that you can see any imperfections in the sanding sealer. Okay, that's the first. And then also it'll treat the sides so that way a lot of stuff won't absorb into them. If you're planning on doing a stain, you should use a wood conditioner, and then that will prevent blotches, because stains will they want to absorb in the cellulose section of the wood. And if you have an area, let's say for instance like this portion right here, this will absorb stain differently. This will absorb differently than here, and we're going to get two different tones. And by using a wood conditioner, and that's exactly what it's called, is wood conditioner, and you get it in the same spot that you can buy your stains at Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever. But if you put a wood conditioner on there, what happens is when you put your stain on, it absorbs equally all the way around. Okay, but now that we've talked about a lot of this stuff, the one last thing about sanding is, so let's say we have an area like this. This has to be sanded and fixed right here because there's like little pieces of fiber that's come out. How do you sand this? Once again, with the direction of the grain, you're going to be coming this way. Some people want to just go like this. It's going to leave scratches. You want to go in the direction of the grain at all times. Sometimes you're going to run across something that the grain will be straight up and down this way. Okay? When that happens, don't do this. It's straight up and down this way, okay? And there is a lot of sanding on your guitar. You cannot get around that. You're going to be sanding until you are sick of it. But that is the only way to make sure that your guitar looks absolutely perfect. And you know, you spend the extra time on it, and when you're finished with it, it's just perfect. It looks great. If you rush through it and you're not real careful about the direction that you sand, you don't test it with a little bit of water, you don't use like your sanding sealer or your wood conditioner or something like that, and that's just on a finish like a natural finish, you're going to regret it, because every single little imperfection will pop up. And that brings us to natural oil finishes, okay? And I'm not a big fan of natural oil finishes. And the reason why is because it doesn't really protect the wood. It's minimal protection, and it allows moisture to enter and exit much more rapidly and more freely. You know, we're dealing with a guitar here that its stability is key. It has to stay stable. If not, you're going to be doing setups on it all the time. You're going to be doing truss rod adjustments all the time, right? We don't want that. And then so when people are asking for things like oil finishes, and I try to talk them out of it, because I know that what they think is it's going to end up allowing their guitar to sound different, but it does not alter the sound any at all. So when it comes to the natural oil finishes, you know, we're dealing with pretty much the exact same thing as before. You can put a thin coat of water on it just like I did, and then look at it, see how it absorbs, say I like it or I don't like it. See some trouble areas that seem to not really be wanting to absorb that water very well, because it will reject the oil as well. Start working with that stuff. Do some different sanding in those areas in order to make everything look nice and easy. Nice and consistent and no blotches. But the natural oil thing, you know, and there's a lot of different kinds that you can use. Typically people like using things like teak oil or tung oil, things like that. And those, you know, like the tung oil, you know, you rub it in, and then you put a nice thin coat. You might do a second coat, maybe a third or a fourth coat. You let it cure, and then you end up buffing it out. Some people want to try to use just plain linseed oil and things like that. I think it's a very bad idea. Like I said, I try to talk everybody out of using natural oil on their woods. right? If you want to use natural oil on something, it should be something that is not, stability is not important, okay? But as far as sanding goes, that's pretty much what we have to kind of keep in mind when it comes to sanding. There's one more thing that we have to cover, and that is things like wood filler, right? Like grain filler. On a guitar like this, I wouldn't use grain filler, right? Simply because this is a natural finish. And if I use a grain filler, it's not going to absorb stain or dye or anything in the same respects. It's typically more porous, and it'll become very, very dark. Sometimes it has resins in it, and then it won't absorb anything at all. And then you see all these white speckles or these colored things that are just not quite right. So the wood filler, if you are going to use it, make sure that you're only using it because you absolutely have to. Many times, if it's just going to be a clear coat or something, what you can do is you can just end up putting a very thin coat on before it completely dries, hit it again with a very thin coat before it dries, and you do multiple coats like that. And then finally what ends up happening is you can actually, when it comes time to the wet sanding and buffing, the actual clear coat itself becomes the grain filler. Let me show you an example of one that needs to actually get painted instead of this. So now here is an example of one that actually needs to get painted, okay? And when it gets painted, you don't have to worry so much about everything looking absolutely perfect when it comes to the sanding, because it's all going to be covered up anyway, right? 220 grit as far as you need to go. Very, very slight little scratches here and there. It's okay, you can get away with it. Little dings here and there, many times you can get away with it. But you know, if you have a large ding or a large chip or something like that, Bondo. Just like I've talked about in my other videos, Bondo, Bondo, Bondo. If it's paint grade, okay? This one's getting painted. And I don't have to worry about wood filler, like grain filler for this, because the primer that I use acts as the grain filler. Some people don't like grain filler, and they don't use it. And after they end up staining their guitars, or they dye them, whatever, they paint them, then they put their clear on, you can actually still feel the wood grain through the clear coat, okay? That's how some people like it. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But if it is paint grade, don't kill yourself trying to make everything absolutely perfect with 220 and 400 grit and all this other stuff, because it's not going to make that big of a difference. By the time you put your primer on, which you have to sand anyway, your primer goes on, you're going to sand it, right? So don't kill yourself sanding something that's going to be painted, right? Now, if you want to use grain filler, you can. I don't see a need for it when it comes to things like guitars, and the majority of woods that people use for guitars, you don't need grain filler. Mahogany has very, very small pores, and so some people do use grain filler for that. And you can color your grain filler. Some people actually use drywall mud, and what they do is they just mix some dye in it, and then they put that in there, then they sand it all off, so that way it kind of matches things, or it complements. But you know, you can use drywall mud if you needed to in order to put your wood filler, your grain filler in. And it's, once again, very, very thin. You wipe up as much as you can. You don't want a big layer of it. You clean that stuff off. You can do that if you want, but if it's paint grade, you're wasting your time, because you can use your primer as your grain filler. Okay, let's talk about some permissible things to use and some things that are not. You might be tempted to go to the store, like Home Depot or something, and pick up some Rust-Oleum or some kind of a spray paint like this, and it says, ooh, there's primer and stuff already in it. Do not use this for your guitar ever, okay? Spray paints should never be used on a guitar, right? You are just asking for problems. They take a very long time to cure. That's the first. The finishes are horrible. It's a lot of times you can't really control the amount of flow that's coming out of them, and you can get really bad orange peel, you can get drips, you can get all sorts of stuff. It's just a really bad idea. Don't use these. Now, the only time that I actually ever do use spray paint is when it's a very specialized spray paint, and it is used for different types of effects that I'm going for on a guitar. I can't really get any other way. And also, this does not really like to bind as well to other types of finishes and other types of paints and things like that. So you're asking for problems. This will start kind of what they consider kind of like melting when you're dealing with paint. And what that basically means is if I end up taking this and well, we're going to have to mix this, obviously. Okay, something like this, okay? Let's say I put that on there, and this is exactly the shape I want of this paint. As soon as I end up spraying my clear on it, my clear has a solvent in it, and what's going to end up happening is it's going to melt into this, and it can actually end up causing this to kind of spread, okay? It's almost like reactivating it, and that's bad, right? And even though urethanes and lacquers and stuff can do the same thing, it's usually not as bad. So avoid spray paints. That is not permissible. Get it out of your head. Lacquer sanding sealer. You can use this. And this you can find at places like Home Depot and Lowe's or cabinet stores and things like that. And this, once again, is good for like if you're doing a maple neck. Before you fret the neck, you spray the neck down with this. Give it a light sand before you start putting your lacquer on. What this does is it'll make sure, or your coloring, because sometimes if you're going to antique it, you need to make sure that it's kind of like a dye, kind of somewhere between paint and dye. It's you know, the antiquing paint. And it'll soak into the end grain much more, and it won't really look like it's antiqued as much as it's been stained. So if you put a coat of this, or 2 coats or 3 coats or whatever of this on first, give it a sand afterwards with something like 320 grit, 400 grit, and then you put your coloring on there, you'll be golden. It'll be great, and then you can start putting your lacquer on, and you'll have a very nice smooth finish. And it'll be even, okay? And this stuff dries really fast. Lacquer sanding sealer also is one of the things that I was talking about earlier, that you can also see what's going to end up, what you'll see if you put clear on, okay? I don't know if there's any in here. Okay, now that that's on there, once again, just like if it was water, we can see the scratches still in it, okay? Nothing has really changed. It's been more dramatic. Now, right now, it looks dark, but this is going to dry. And when this dries, it won't really leave a finish just like the water did, okay? But once again, this dries, you sand it. Now, let me show you one more thing before I show you a dye. And here is a lacquer that you can use also. Now this is a spray lacquer, and I was saying that don't use spray paint, but you can use spray lacquer. It'll take a lot of coats. We're talking probably 6 or 7 coats of this stuff to get it thick enough in order to do your clear coat. So if once again you're doing a maple neck or something along those lines, you can use this, especially if you're trying to match something that already has lacquer on it. You can use these very thin coats, okay? And you also have to make sure that before you start putting this on, the surface is perfectly smooth, right? You want to, because this will absorb, once again, just like this stuff is, into scratches and everything along those lines. You want this to be all nice and neat, perfectly cured, dried, sanded, everything ready. Then you hit it with this. And this stuff, once again, also dries very quickly, okay? This dries very fast. And you want to do very thin coats. You would not want to go, never, ever do that, okay? You might be tempted to, but don't do that. You want a very thin coat, let it set up. Now that doesn't mean let it dry completely or let it cure. What that basically means is you let it where you get it to the point where it's almost dry. It's tacky. If you were to put your finger on it, you'd leave a fingerprint, but it's not running. You want it to be sticky, okay? When it's in that position, you spray it again. When that coat gets to that position, you spray it again. And you don't test it by touching it. If you are going to test it by touching it, you touch it inside like the pickup cavity or something that's never going to be seen, right? You don't want to touch anything else. And also, when you're getting ready to actually paint this stuff, you need to make sure that your guitar body doesn't touch anything until it's completely cured. And we're going to get into that a little bit later on down the line. Okay? But this stuff is permissible to use. But like I said, you're probably going to end up having to use 5, 7, 10 coats in order to get it thick enough that you can wet sand and buff. Let's say you're going to antique a neck. Now you can buy this type of stuff at Stu Mac. And this is a lacquer. And what this is supposed to do is this basically ends up making the guitar look aged. But if I were to just spray this on here, okay, like right now, okay, and this is same, very, very thin coats. I wouldn't go any more than that. I'd let this set up, and then I would do another coat, and I'd keep doing it like that until I got to the darkness that I was looking for. But I would not want to put this on until I had a sanding sealer on there, okay? Now, let's look at the back here, where this is rough from where I ran it through a bandsaw, and I used this for scrap wood underneath what I was routing. If I take this and I spray this, every one of those cuts jumps out at you. Every single one of those cuts jumps out, okay? Very, very bad, okay? That's why sanding's important, sanding sealer's important. Here's a piece of Doug fir. Let's hit this lightly with this, okay? It's very subtle, okay? But it's fairly even. But if I take this and then I spray the side of it, do you see how dark that is compared to this? That looks horrible when you are doing a neck. And so that's why, once again, you'd use a sanding sealer on it if you're planning on going this route. Now this paint right here is actually kind of expensive, right? But it's a specialty paint. You don't have to actually use this. You can mix your own, and I'm going to show you ways that you can mix your own colors. Because if you're going to be doing painting, you have to start learning about color theory and how to make all your own colors out of the primaries, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So let's talk a little bit about the differences between some things, so you have a better understanding. You can get things like polyurethane. Okay, do not use this on your guitar. You can get things like lacquer. This one is okay. Okay, and some people say, what's really the difference between these two guys? Okay, urethanes are basically, think of them as a plastic almost when it dries. Okay, and the way that this dries is it cures. Okay, in other words, this is something that is not like water-based, that it evaporates and it's dry and you're good. Okay, this is something that cures. This is like a plastic. Okay, this is very tough. It's very strong. Okay, a lacquer, on the other hand, has different components in it that have been it's been mixed with a solvent. And when you spray this, what happens is the solvent evaporates and it leaves behind all of the, it just depends on what they made the lacquer out of, really. But it leaves that stuff behind, and this can harden too. But this doesn't dry. It doesn't cure, I should say. This does not cure. It dries. As time goes by, it kind of cures a little bit, but that's not really how this thing works. And you'll see right here it says 30 minutes, okay? Because that's how long basically it takes for these solvents to evaporate out of the material that's in here, okay? This, on the other hand, can take a long time. This can take 24 hours or more before it's completely cured, Okay. Some people will say, well, which is better? It depends on what you're doing, right? Lacquer is good, urethane is good. Okay, they're both good. It just depends on what you're doing. Lacquer is it's not as strong of a finish. It's not as tough. It's not as resilient. The good thing is about lacquer is because it has the solvent in it. When you spray your first coat on there and that solvent evaporates, you can spray another coat of lacquer on it. The solvent that's in the new coat will actually melt into the old coat. And when it does that, it's like those two coats bind to one another, and it's like thicker, and it's like the same coat that's just getting thicker, and each time that you do that, it'll work. Polyurethane, on the other hand, even though it does have a solvent in it, it doesn't really burn into it as well, or melt into it as well. And if you are going to be using things like polyurethane, you can't really wait. As soon as a polyurethane is perfectly dry, when you spray your next coat of polyurethane on there, it's not really going to bind as well as the lacquer would bind to the next coat. So that's why this one can be fully dry before you put another coat and everything's fine. This one, if it's fully dry, it'll still bind. It's just not gonna bind as well. And there's times that when you spray one coat on top of another coat with urethanes, if you sand through, when you're wet sanding, if you sand through too much, you'll actually end up seeing the layers. It's a very subtle thing, but you can see the layers. Or on lacquer, you don't see that. Lacquer, I honestly, the only time I use lacquer is when I'm trying to match something that currently has lacquer on it, or it's vintage or something like that. That's the only time I use lacquer. Every other time I use urethane, but I don't use this one. I use the one that is in the high volume, low pressure spray gun, which we'll get into a little bit later on down the line. But think of this as plastic. This one not so much. This one not as strong as this one. This one can yellow over time. This one generally does not. The difference between a stain and a dye. What's the difference between a stain and a dye? Okay. Stains have pigment in them, and pigment you should think of as small little particulates, okay? And they need to be emulsified within the solvent. And then there's also a binder in this. So think of one of them as the solvent that is inside this. Make sure that everything can stay emulsified. It can stay mixed up real well. It can keep the pigment suspended in it and whatnot. Okay. If you didn't have a binder in it, though, there's a binder in this as well, which is kind of like a glue. If you think of it like a glue or a lacquer or a urethane, something like that. If it didn't have a binder in it, as soon as you put this on your wood, it could actually come off, right? But what this does is it leaves like a film. And you should think of this almost as a very, very thin, transparent paint, okay? But anytime you use a stain, you have to make sure that you mix it up really well and get all that pigment floating around inside there, and it's mixed up really, really well. Because if not, all you're going to have is a binder, and you're going to have the solvent inside here, and the pigment will be on the bottom of it. You have to, if you haven't used it in a while, you have to stir it. And even during the time that you're using it, every now and then you should probably give it a stir just to make sure that everything is continually mixed. Sometimes one of the things that they use, the solvent, the carrier, whatever you want to call it, sometimes they use an oil. And this stuff will absorb. This will absorb into between wood fibers and into wood pores and things like that. And in the case of that one neck that we did over here, okay, and the lacquer, it's almost dry actually. Let's flip this over. And let me grab a glove and show you something on this. Anytime that you're using chemicals for your finishing, you need to make sure it's always in a very well ventilated area. That's the very first thing, and always wear lung protection not a dust mask. A dust mask is for dust. You need to use something that's got charcoal filters in it. You don't want to be breathing any of this shit, okay? That's the first. Always wear gloves, okay? Now, I'm stirring this, and if I run across the bottom, you'll see that clump right there, okay? That's the pigment, okay? And this is the stuff that you have to stir this for a long time and get all of that pigment suspended within the stain here, okay? Now I'm not going to bother because I'm not really trying to stain anything of importance right now with this, but we'll clean that off. And if you were going to stain something, once again, it's a good idea to use a wood conditioner. But what you want to do, this is espresso, the color, and it's supposed to be very, very dark, okay? What you'd want to do is you would basically want to rub this in. You would still be dealing with the problems of things like end grain. End grain will want to absorb this much more readily than the top portion of it, okay? And so a wood conditioner is very good for that. You would let this set for a few minutes, and don't worry about trying to wipe it off right now, okay? But you let this set for a few minutes. Allow that solvent, allow that carrier, everything like that to really get into those pores. After a few minutes, you come back over with a dry rag and you clean up any excess. Let this stuff dry, let it set up, and if you want to make it darker, wait till it's completely dry, then put a second coat. The second coat will not absorb as much because we have the binder in it, okay? That's something to keep in mind. We have a binder in that. And so it's not going to want to absorb as much. But I'm glad this is here. You'll see that this section right here didn't really absorb much. This is glue, okay? This is another reason why you have to make sure everything is sanded perfectly before you decide to start finishing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some water here, because once again this will show you the importance of water. I can come over here, do the water, and it stands out even more. You'll see where the glue is, because where the glue is, the water will not absorb as much, or it won't absorb at all. Depends on the type of glue you're using. This particular glue that was here was hide glue, okay? And hide glue is a little bit more hydrophilic. It'll take the water on a little bit more than a dry PVA glue, okay? But this would be ready to sit there and say, okay, just leave it alone, boom. I'm going to let this set up and I'm going to let it cure. Might take a day, might take two, it just depends, okay? Depends on how much you put on there. But like I was saying before, it'll absorb differently in the end grain. And that's why a wood conditioner is good. So that's the story with stain. Now let's talk a little bit about dyes. A dye is different. A dye doesn't really have pigment. Sometimes they put pigment in it, but this is more like a salt, okay? Where as soon as you mix it with water, the salt dissolves and it becomes very, 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 very small, typically transparent particles that basically are suspended in the water. Now you can use water or you can use alcohol or a combination of the two for your carrier, okay, for your solvent. And then it doesn't take a lot, just a little bit of this in a container like this or this will take you far. It doesn't take a lot, okay? Now, this does not have a binder in it. And because of that, as soon as you end up putting this on and it dries, because this will dry, you're going to have the evaporation of the water or the alcohol, and it'll leave almost like a dust behind. And if you rubbed your finger over it, your finger would turn that color, okay? It doesn't have a binder on it. But what's good about the lack of a binder is it allows you to do multiple coats, and even coats in different colors, and you can do it in layers, and it's never going to really change how well the next layer is going to absorb into it. This, on the other hand, when it dries, the next coat's not going to want to absorb as much because this has a binder in it. Okay, so let's do an example of the dyes. Now, this one right here I think is purple, and these things you mix yourself, or you can buy them already in packages like this. This is actually blue, okay, But with this stuff, and this is a oh, this is brown. This is brown, and it's very thin. We're not really going to be able to see it too well. So I'm going to grab a piece of maple veneer, so that way we can see this jump out more. Okay. And this brown was one I mixed myself, and I'm gonna show you guys later on exactly how to mix colors. And you'll see that when I did this, this grain that's flamed right here jumps out compared to what's happening here, right? Big difference. If I use stain, we wouldn't really see the exact same thing. This is transparent. What's happening here is this is absorbing into the flame portion because of the fiber construction of the wood, right? And that's why it's happening the way that it is. Now let's say, for instance, and this is a technique that you can do. Let's say, for instance, you wanted to have very dark flame, and you wanted to have more of a yellow top, right? Well, what you can do is do exactly what we did here. You do the dark first. Afterwards, you come in with your sandpaper after this dries. Right now this is still wet, and when it dries it's going to become much lighter, okay? But as soon as you end up hitting that with the clear coat, this will pop again, okay? But after this dries, you can hit it with some sandpaper, take some of this brown off the top here, and then hit it with yellow. And then what will happen is the dark brown will kind of remain in the background. It'll stay there, and the top will look much yellower, and you're going to see more depth to it. We can also, right now, end up using yellow on top of this. This is one of the good things about dyes compared to stains. Dyes are typically what's used at places like Paul Reed Smith and stuff like that. But we can add color on top of this and say, ooh, I like the way that looks. It changed it, but it didn't really take away that brown too much, right? So you can really do a lot of cool things with dyes. We can also, if we wanted to, we could come in here with this color. I'm not even sure what this one is. I really should mark these. I think this is brown as well. I think this is just a darker one. Or it could be a green or something. What color is this? This is more of a greenish brown. Okay, that's not what I want to use. Let me grab a different color here. So here's blue. Okay, now I can take this blue. Okay, and this is still wet. But if I came in and I rubbed this and I kind of started bringing it up the side like that, right? I can do different fades in different colors, right? And you can let this stuff dry. Do it again. You can do multiple colors. You could take red, come in. You can do all sorts of cool things with dyes. This is typically why you'll see people like Paul Reed Smith and Gelvin and other people use dyes. But this is not the only way that you can get a color on a piece of flame maple or any type of raw wood. This is the best way to get that to get this to pop, right? To get that flame to pop is using a dye. Okay, that's the absolute best way to do it. But you can also use candy colors and things like that, which we'll get into a little bit later. Dyes, water-based, or you can put alcohol. Using alcohol will make it where this evaporates much faster and you can work quicker, right? And it also makes it where it doesn't absorb as much, right? Because it's going to evaporate more. Dyes go much deeper into the wood than a stain does, okay? But stains, you'll notice on a stain where the pores are, it definitely absorbs a lot more. And if you did a poor job sanding it, it's going to absorb into those sanding areas really bad. It'll jump out to a point where you're going to be like, you know, I made a mistake. So it's really important that you don't have any rough surfaces like where this broke or anything, or this area up here that we did the 60 grit. See this right here, how it's tacky? This is what I was talking about earlier about, okay, this would be ready for another coat. It's not perfectly dry, right? But it's still it's dry enough that we don't have to worry about getting any runs or anything along those lines. When you buy dyes, you might get them in packages like this. This package of dye right here will probably end up making about 6 containers of about this size, right? Or maybe even more of dye. This right here will do tons of guitars. You don't really need a lot of dye, okay? But once again, if you are using dyes, something to keep in mind is when it dries, it does become lighter. And so during the time that you are, you know, putting your dye on your maple or whatever you're doing, you want to do it as quickly as possible. Because if not, by the time you get from point A to point B and this starts drying, you might think it needs more because it doesn't match this side. And then by the time everything looks right and you leave and everything's dry, this side will actually have become darker because it's got more dye on it than this side. So speed is important. And let me show you something about dye after it's set in and something to avoid. Now this guitar had already been finished and I had it ready to put a sanding sealer on it, a seal coat, so then I could take this to the clear and everything would be fine. But before I could get to that, somebody had opened a Sprite up and the Sprite shot all over the place and it landed on here. And you can see where it landed because water, as soon as water hits it again, boom, it's reactivated and you can move stuff around. Now if I end up taking a rag and putting a little bit of water on it, okay, and come in here, you'll see that it can make some of these spots disappear, but it also ends up taking up some of that dye. Now this has to be redone anyway, so this is kind of in a way acting like my sandpaper, okay? I don't want to, on a dye you don't have to sand it, okay? Or on a stain, you absolutely would have to. You could use something like acetone or some other type of solvent, but generally you don't get very good results that way. Most time with stain you have to let it cure completely and then afterwards go in and sand it. But you'll see that what I'm doing here has pretty much erased those droplets, okay? And in fact, the way that this is looking, I might be able to just do some fancy water scrubbing with this and maybe hit it with the airbrush one more time with black around the outside and I have saved this. But that's a good thing about dye. It's very forgiving. And there's so many options when it comes to color. Dye, using dyes is very similar to using candy colors when you're actually doing the painting of the guitar. And we'll get into that here in just a second. But you'll see that what I had just done had pretty much erased the mess up. After this ends up drying, it'll become lighter like this around here, and then I can hit this with some candy colors to kind of make this pop again and look correct. So let's talk a little bit about color mixing. We're going to get into some actual paints a little bit later on and clear coats and stuff, but we need to understand color, okay? And I recommend everybody going out, spending about $5 to $10, buying some acrylic paints. You can get these at places like Michael's or any other art store. Okay, this is hardened. But this will teach you what you need to know about this is hardened a lot. This will teach you what you need to know about color mixing so you can make all of your own custom colors, whether it's with dyes or it's with paints. And many of you probably know already that I am a professional oil painter as well. I haven't done it in years. I haven't had time, but I used to teach a lot of color theory and stuff to beginning artists. These are our primary colors. We have blue, red, and yellow, and you always want to try to find primaries. If you find something that says magenta or something in it, chances are it's got blue in there as well. And there's really no such thing as a primary color, but you want to find something that says primary because it's the closest you're going to get. And if we look right here, we'll see it says primary red, okay? But a lot of times something will look yellow, or it's going to look red, or it's going to look blue, but it actually isn't. It's got other colors in it. So when asking for the paints, you tell them, I want to make sure that it's primary, like when it's time to buy the paints. Close as you can get. Cobalt blue sometimes is pretty close too. Now, it's important to understand something about color. Color always looks different depending on what color it's next to. Okay? In other words, if I grab some blue right here, okay, and just a touch of red, just a touch, and mix it inside here. Let me add a little bit more to that. I don't want to put too much. Okay? And if I told somebody, hey, what color is that? They're going to say blue. Okay? And the reason why it looks blue is because there's really nothing next to it except for this brown that's on the outside. But if I ended up taking the actual blue and I ran it next to it, you would see that this is much more blue than that, and this is actually a form of purple. And I don't know if the camera is going to see it, so I'm going to add a little bit more red to this. And the thing is I don't know if you were here, you'd be able to see the subtle difference. Okay? Most people would say that that's blue, but looking at that, you can and you know it can't be because I just added red. That's actually purple. And the only reason why we can see that it's purple is because we've got a real blue next to it. Okay? So what appears to be a certain color might not be. You've got to train your eye to this. But we've got our three different colors. And some of these are more dominant than others, right? Yellow is not as dominant as red or blue. In other words, it takes a lot more yellow to have to see the yellow in it than it does for the red or the blue. Blue is a strong color, red is a strong color, yellow not so much, white's not so much. Okay. Here's an example. I'm going to take some of this yellow right here. Okay. Now I've got some blue on my finger, but this is our yellow. Now all it takes is ever so barely any blue, and you'll see how the blue dominated that. Okay? And the way that you end up mixing colors is basically we have our primaries, our secondaries, and our tertiaries. These are our primary colors. And you'll notice I don't have black here. Okay? But yellow and blue, that makes green. Yellow and red makes orange. Okay? These are our secondary colors. Okay? Green, orange, and purple are our secondary colors. You see how that red just dominated that? It's a much stronger color than yellow. Okay? And then we also have purple, which blue is more dominant than red. So on the purple, I'm going to purposely be using more red. Okay? So now we have our secondary colors. Tertiary colors are basically when you take these guys and you end up mixing whatever you didn't mix the first time. So yellow and this is blue and yellow. The only thing we didn't mix was red. So if I take red and I mix it inside here, we're going to get an off brown color. Okay? And that's how you make browns, by the way. So this is orange. We have yellow and red. The only thing we didn't add was blue. And if we put some blue inside here, oh man, that's dominant, and it's turned more of a green color, okay, but it's getting muddy. And then this one would require yellow. And I have a lot of yellow here, and you'll see that, there we go. That looks more like a brown, but it's still kind of greenish, the way that these paints are, okay. But that's how you make browns. It's just whatever you ended up making your secondaries. That's how you go about making your browns. Just mix whatever wasn't in there the first time, a small amount of it. Okay. Now let's talk about trying to match a color. Okay, we're going to try to match a color. And what we'll do is we'll try to match the color of my skin. A lot of people have a hard time with this. They think that this is like peach or pink or something, and it isn't. This is actually orange. Okay, skin is actually orange. So what we want to do is, what is the main color that we see? Well, this is very light. So the main color is going to be white. Okay, that's the main. You should always look for that. If you see this, the main color should be red. Main color should be blue, right? This is how you figure that type of stuff out. Looking at this, we know that this is purple, and it's primarily blue. Okay, so the blue is going to be the main ingredient. You always look for the main. Okay, so we have white, and then what we need to do is, what's the next color that we see? And we might see red. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll come inside here, we'll grab a little bit of red. Once again, red goes a long way. Okay, so we'll put a little bit in there. That makes pink. Okay, but that's actually too light of a pink. Okay, we're going to come in here like that. Okay, and this is what most people think flesh is, but there's no way that that color is the same as this color. Okay, flesh is actually orange. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take yellow, and we're going to put some yellow in this. I'm going to put more red in it, and what you do is you keep comparing until it looks like the color that you think it should be. Now we're getting closer to a flesh color, but that's far too white. Okay, it's far too white. It's too light colored. So what I would do is I would start adding things like more red to darken it. I'd add more yellows and things like that. I'm going to add a little bit more red to this. It's kind of hard to finger paint and get this right. Okay. Okay. That's getting closer, but it's far too light. And one of the reasons is because this is too pure of a color. So what we do is we come in with just a touch of blue, and blue is a very dominant color. And we want to gray that out a little bit. Okay? It's far too light. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take some more red. We're going to put that inside there. Now that's too red. So we're going to add a little bit of yellow again. But yellow, once again, like I said, is a very weak color. The red will dominate it. Okay? Okay? And you'll see that as I make this thicker and I start adding the darker colors to it, I added way too much white to start with. But we're getting closer and closer to that actual flesh color. Let's talk about different tapes. Okay? This is a typical masking tape. Never use this. Okay? It's garbage. This right here is painter's tape. This is permissible sometimes, but I'm going to explain why this is bad. I should probably explain why this is bad. This is bad for the same reasons why this is bad, but this also, this can absorb different paints, and it can leave gum and things behind. Sometimes it's really hard to get off if you've let it sit on there for a long time. It can react real bad to things that have solvents in them. This is just really, really bad. This might be okay if you're going to be painting your house, but this should never be around when you're doing guitar stuff. This can work on a lot of things because it doesn't really have the reaction that I was talking about with that. But the problem with painter's tape is if you were to place this down on something and now we were to paint that, the tape itself doesn't set perfectly flat across these edges, and the paint can seep underneath it, and you get like this weird jagged line, right? And it ruins, if you're trying to do a nice straight line when you're airbrushing or something like that, you'll get that if you're using this type of tape because it's got too much texture to it. The good thing is it comes off really easy. You can let this stay on whatever you're working on for a really long time, then pull it off, and it doesn't leave any gum or anything behind, and it doesn't really react to solvents too much. It does react to water quite badly though. Okay, so this is something that I might use to cover up my fretboards.
or cover up my, you know, anything like that that's trying to just cover up the majority of something I don't want to get any paint on, but I'm not really concerned about the side of it, like where the paint actually might touch. These are like the types of tapes that you'd get, once again, at a place that you can buy automotive paint at. And this is like for pinstriping and things like that. This has all the qualities of this, except when this goes on, and you push down on that, paint will not want to go underneath this nearly as bad. Okay, it'll give you a much cleaner line to it. That's the first, and there's another type of tape that you can buy at places like Home Depot and Lowe's, and it's called frog tape. And unfortunately, I don't have any around me right now, but it's either green or yellow. And frog tape is very, very good too. It is actually in some ways it's better than this. The adhesion properties of frog tape are not as good as this, but when it comes to doing perfectly straight lines, the ease of removal, not really reacting to solvents too much, it's pretty good. It's pretty good, but it leaves straighter lines than these kinds of tape. So once again, don't go cheap on the tape. Don't use stuff like this. Don't use Scotch tape or nothing like that. This you can get away with for many things. You want to use this or you want to use frog tape. Let's talk a little bit about safety gear. Now here's an old mask that I haven't used in a long time. I have about 10 of these in my shop, because anytime that I'm around any of these chemicals that I'm using, I'm always wearing this. And you'll notice that this has got a charcoal filter on it on both sides. And this is important. You should always wear one of these anytime you're spraying anything. You want something with the charcoal filters. You want something that is made for paints, okay? If you can smell the paint, something is wrong. You also want to make sure that if you look inside here, you'll see that there's these little valves. You need to make sure that these are clean, they're not cracked, they're not broken, anything along those lines. What these do is when you breathe, it allows the air to come in this way, but when you exhale, it pushes against it. And then that one opens and it allows the air out. This one right here, you have to check and make sure that this is also functioning correctly too. If you are a man and you have facial hair, when using this, you have to be clean shaven, at least in the area that your mask is going around, because it needs to have a good seal. Once again, if you can smell any of the paint, something is wrong, and that is not a good thing. These charcoal filters also become saturated after a while, and you have to replace them. Okay, just go with the manufacturer's suggestions on that. These you can usually get for under $30, and they're well worth the money. Make sure that you constantly are making sure that everything works on them, because your lungs and your health are at risk. So that's the first. No dust mask. You want to use something that's like this or better. When it comes to gloves, you have to be careful, okay? Things like acetone and solvents will eat through the majority of different gloves. I usually use nitrile gloves, and they protect me quite well for almost everything that I use. And if acetone does get on them, I have about 30 seconds before the acetone eats through the glove, okay? The acetone will start eating through it though, okay? But you know, you want to things like latex. No, don't use things like latex. You want to use something that is chemical resistant. Okay. Once again, you know, you're dealing with your health. These dyes, that even these water-based dyes, they will absorb into your skin, and it'll take days for it to come out. And some of these, the dyes, some of the stuff it's made out of, it's not really good for you. So you need to make sure you protect yourself, your hands. You want to make sure you protect your lungs, all that other good stuff. Same thing with the sanding. When you're sanding, you can wear a dust mask. But you need to make sure that you keep yourself, basically, your lungs, your eyes, your hands. You want to keep all of this stuff off of you as much as you possibly can. You can become sensitized to it. It can make you sick. It can poison you. Be careful. Work in a well-ventilated area. Always wear your proper safety gear. You know, you can also, same thing with the stain, okay? The stain will go through this a little bit faster than maybe some of the paints that I use, okay? Because it's got the solvents. And the paints I use have solvents too, but they don't react with these gloves as bad, okay? But spend the money, get good gloves, get good lung protection, and you'll be happy that you did. It'll allow you to do this type of stuff for long periods of time and never get sick from it or poisoned or become sensitized. And always, always, always go by what the manufacturer suggests you use. If it says use this type of equipment, use that kind of equipment. Now, I have been trying to keep these videos done in a fashion that the average person that's got a garage or something can build a guitar without a lot of expensive gear. So what I did is I went out and picked up some stuff from Harbor Freight Tools. They also, you can order online. This stuff is very cheap. The tools there typically are substandard. I'm not going to lie, okay? They're not the greatest tools in the world, but some of these will work for what you need and you don't have to spend a lot of money. Typically, I end up using things like this. Now, this is made by Devil Bliss, and these are the types of spray guns that I end up using. Now, these are the same ones that automotive paint places use, okay? And you can tell this one's got a lot of usage out of it. But this is typically what I use for my guitar spraying. But something like this is not really required. This will last a long time. There's a lot of different parts you can buy for it. Things like that, but it's not required. What I went out and I spent, I think $60 or something on this stuff. Something like that you might spend over $200 for. And something as simple as this will work just fine for your guitar, okay? This will work for your primer, this will work for your paint, and this will work for your clear coat. Something like this will also work, okay? It's much smaller, it's only 4 ounces, and you might have to refill it, but something like this will work just as well. I think this was 20 bucks, okay? Blow guns, okay, or a blow grip, or whatever you want to call it, for air. You're going to need an air compressor if you're going to be painting like this. This is good because this cleans all the dust out of all the pores, it cleans everything, there's no sawdust anywhere that's on the surface that you're planning on painting. That's really important. The last thing you'd want to do is start painting and realize that there's little pieces of wood dust here and there that end up actually creating little bumps in the surface. You don't want that. Everything you want to be very, very clean, especially when you get ready to do the clear coat. Not only will you use this, but you'll use a tack cloth, and we'll get into the tack cloths in just a few minutes. You also need to make sure that you have air filters, and what this does is this takes particulates and water and stuff like that out of your air hose, because your compressor is going to be taking air from the ambient area and it's going to compress it, and when it does it creates moisture, okay, and this moisture gets stuck in the tanks and sometimes it shoots out the hose, and when it shoots out the hose, if you're painting, it can create problems. That's the first. The second is also the inside of the compressor will often rust due to the moisture that's inside there. And when it does rust, sometimes these little rust particulates fly out and it gets on your finish. And so it's really important to have an air filter. This one goes right before the gun. This goes before the gun, and I also have another moisture trap that's actually connected to the compressor itself. I try to have 3 filters before it goes to the gun, so that way I know my air is very clean. If you're doing a black guitar or something, it's not as important because you won't see things like that shoot out, okay? But you can still have a problem with the moisture. If you're doing something that's light colored, it's an absolute must, especially if you're doing things like fluorescence or white or something like that, because any slight little difference or change will show up. And I'm talking pinhole size stuff will show up and you'll be able to see it. It's important to get these. This is about $2 to $3.
You can order these online from other manufacturers. It's the exact same one. They might charge you 15 bucks. This is like $2, okay? You need that. You can spend a few dollars and get some cleaning brushes. So after you're done using your gun, you can clean it out real well and you can use it again and you won't have problems. One issue that if you don't clean your guns real well, what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up having residue from old paint inside there. And sometimes it comes loose and if you spray, all of a sudden you have a flake of a different color that shows up on your guitar. So once again, you're dealing with something like a white guitar and you painted a couple of black guitars 2 weeks before, you didn't clean it out real well, you start spraying and all of a sudden it looks like these little black flakes are on certain parts of your guitar and you have to sand it and you have to repaint it. Clean your guns after every single use. When it comes to cleaning your guns, I use acetone, okay? They have different types of cleaners and stuff like that, but I find that acetone is readily available. It's cheap. It's a great thinner. It's fantastic. And of course, you're going to end up having to get some type of fittings for whatever hoses that you end up using. These guns will sometimes come with brushes like this. They're kind of okay, but they're not that great. Okay, but ultimately, what this comes with, there's one thing that you should get that it just did not come with, and that is a pressure regulator like this one right here. You can get them from Harbor Freight as well. They're usually about $8, $5, something like that. But you want to be able to control the amount of air pressure that's actually coming through the gun. You can do it through your compressor, okay? But this is just a lot more convenient when you're sitting there and you're trying to get the flow just right, because it changes depending on the viscosity of whatever's in here. The primer is going to be different than the actual paint, and the paint is going to be different than the clear coat and things like that. So this just makes it a lot more easy, and also you can kind of keep track of what's going on right here. Typically, you don't want the pressure too high when you're using these. You should go by the manufacturer's recommendation as a starting point. Okay, that's not necessarily what you should keep it at, but as a starting point, that's a good thing. And then from there, whatever works is what you use. We'll get into that a little bit later. But when we look at this gun, we're going to see a few things. Okay, we see that we have a filter in here. This filter is important. Okay, we want to make sure that this filter is inside. Some filters don't go in that way. Some filters go in this way. Okay, it just depends on the manufacturer. Either way, it's going to work just fine. I typically will put them in this way. From here, you end up just getting this and putting that on there. Now, the reason that filter is important, but what's more important is actually filtering your paint before it goes into your canister here. Okay, but we'll get into that stuff a little bit later. This section up here, typically on most of these, okay, you can undo this and you can get different size tips and things for this, and same thing with up here. A lot of times you can get different faces to this, and depending on the size of it, it kind of changes things a little bit as far as the flow goes, and depending on how thick of a product you're using, you might have to change that stuff. Now this is good for pretty much everything we're going to be doing, so we don't have to change anything. But in this area, you are going to be taking this stuff apart later on down the line to clean it out. Okay, and this guy right here, see how it can turn? This changes the flow direction. So if I have this guy like right here, and then I'm spraying it this way, the flow is going to be vertical, okay, of paint. If I get this and I turn it this way, now the flow is going to be horizontal, okay? That's all that's for. Okay, let's go ahead and look at this. Most guns are going to have these features or similar features. This right back here controls exactly how much fluid is going to basically be gravity fed into this area right here, okay? So if you're spraying and there's a very, very thin amount that's coming out, the first thing to look at would be the flow, okay? That's the first. But it could also be the paint is too thick, okay? Or you have a clogged gun because you didn't clean it well. Sometimes back here, there's actually an adjustment right here that controls exactly how much you can actually pull this trigger. And if that is way too tight, it'll always stop and you won't be able to get a lot of paint out of this. But this particular one does not have that. This controls the flow. This is just a lock. So after you end up getting the flow the way that you want it, you can lock this in place. This right here controls the pattern, okay? And the pattern basically is it a tight circle or does it kind of expand, okay? That's basically what it is. That's basically what it means. Is it going to be a really tight circle or not? And you don't want to use a tight circle, okay? A tight circle is almost guaranteed drips. It's not a good thing. You want something to kind of fan out. But this controls the shape of the paint when it's coming out. This down here controls the amount of air that basically is coming. This is an air control right here. So when you first set this up, after you put your paint and stuff in there, you're going to have to kind of fool with these guys a little bit to really dial it in. And that way, when you grab your guitar and you get ready to start painting it, there's no surprises. And typically you want to practice on something, maybe like an old piece of drywall or poster board or an old cardboard box or something like that, to dial all this stuff in first. And then after it's dialed in, you know, you set it down, you grab your guitar, and then you're ready to paint. If you just grab this and assume it's right and you try to hit this, you know, the best case is no paint will come out or very little paint. Worst case is you're going to end up getting a huge drip and runs all over your guitar, and it's going to be horrible, and you're going to have to wait for it to cure, dry, whatever, and you're going to have to sand it all off and start over. So always do tests. Now acetone is what I pretty much use for all my cleaning. The one thing to keep in mind is acetone will eat plastic. Okay, now some of these plastics acetone will not touch. Acetone won't damage this cup or anything, but acetone will damage the finish that is on this gun right here. And sometimes some of the seals that are in here, the acetone will eat up too. So you want to use it sparingly, and you only want to use it where you absolutely need to use it. If you're going to be cleaning the gun, once again, like things like this, you can actually take this all the way out, because when you clean your gun, you really need, and pull your needle out and clean this very, very well. Make sure everything is nice and clean. Afterwards, you can put it back in there and you're good to go. Whatever the manufacturer is of your particular gun, just follow their instructions on how to clean it. So another thing that you're going to be needing are basically fine strainers. Once again, where you buy your paint, they'll often just give you a handful of these for free when you buy your paint. But this is a very, very fine mesh, and you don't want to have any lumps or any types of pigment or anything come through into your cup here. You want everything to be very homogenized, no chunks, no weird things inside there at all. This is a measuring cup, and you can see it's been used before, and I often reuse my cups depending on what I'm doing for them. Paint usually will not stick to these very well, and so you can clean them out. This one apparently is not clean, but this has got all these different types of mixing ratios and stuff on them, and whatever your paint that you buy or primer or clear coat, they usually will have different ratios. They'll tell you what to mix, how much to mix, and this cup will help you out quite a bit. But mixing cups are a good idea. Don't use things like styrofoam cups or Dixie cups or things like that, because not only can you not really see exactly how much you're measuring, a lot of times these solvents will eat right through them. Okay, something like this is good. I've got tons of these. But let's say we didn't clean this out, and I ended up putting some
white primer in here, and I mixed it up real well. When I pour it through the strainer, any of these particulates that are inside there, the majority of them are going to get trapped inside here, okay? And it would almost look like it might look like perfectly white primer, and none of the little black specks might even come out, right? That's the first filter that you should always use before you put anything inside your gun. Then we have the second filter inside the gun, right? Painting, there is a lot of filtering to it. We also have tack cloths, and tack cloths are nothing more than just lint-free cloths that have like this gummy texture to them, this gummy feel to it. And what it does is it picks up fine dust, it picks up lint, it picks up everything, it picks up hairs, it picks up everything off of the guitar that you're planning on painting. Now when you do your primer, you don't have to worry about using this. After you do your you do your painting itself, before you put the clear coat on, that's when you use this. And you don't want to have anything on top of that paint. You want it to be spotless, and that's what the tack cloth does. And you don't have to scrub it. You just gently wipe over it real nice and easy, and it'll pick all of that stuff up. It'll pick up loose paint that dried and then hit the body as well. That stuff usually isn't a problem, but any dust that's in the air that landed on it, it will be. Anytime that you are painting, you have to be in a very, very clean environment where there's no dust in the area, there's no bugs, because bugs for some reason are attracted to the paint, and a lot of times they'll fly and they'll stick to your paint job. I mean, it sounds funny, but it's true. You need to be in a very clean environment. Once again, you also need to be in an area that's very well ventilated, and you have to be wearing your safety gear, right? Think of it as almost like surgery. You want to be in a room that's like surgically clean. Nothing in there can touch your paint. It's very, very important, and you don't want to have anything underneath the clear coat that's not supposed to be there. That's what the tack cloth is for. Let's talk a little bit about paints. Okay, now I typically will use Custom Shop and House of Color. Those are the two that I usually use. I have a lot of different little canisters of different samples of their paints. This is what I use for my airbrushing, and I have quart containers. I have quart containers of things like fluorescent paints, okay, and things I use a lot of, like triple black base coat, okay. And each one of these paints, you really need to check with the manufacturer to see exactly how they're supposed to be applied, right? Usually if you talk to whoever you buy the paint from, you can ask them and they will tell you, hey, you need to do this first, you need that, you need this special thing or whatever, because all paints are not the same. But paints come in different, different types of finishes. For instance, right here, and they should always be well mixed. This is a cobalt blue candy color, and a candy color is nothing more than a transparent color. So by getting this and putting this on whatever we're going to put on, of course that's kind of thick right there, okay, but putting this over it, and if we sprayed it on, we would see something that was similar to this. We'd be able to see through it. Candy colors are great when you're trying to make sure you can still see what was underneath it, right? Whatever paint or whatever finish is underneath it. Let's say, for instance, you're going to be doing something with maple, like a flamed maple, and you're just trying to accent something. You use a candy, because you'll still be able to see everything underneath, but all you're doing is you're kind of adding a hue to that portion that you're planning on painting. It's transparent. Candy colors are transparent. What we have here is a blue metallic, and metallics basically look like they're small pieces of aluminum or something that's inside of it, and a lot of this is not transparent, by the way. If you make it thin enough, it'll probably be. But this is going to be kind of hard to see the metallic in it, okay? But it kind of has this sheen of like very, very small metal particulates in there. Sometimes candy colors have a touch of metallic in them. Now this is what's known as pagan gold candy, and the same thing. This is kind of like a cross between a metallic and a candy color. You can get things like that, or you can just end up getting a straight color. Now this is a fluorescent blue, and you'll see that the pigment is separate from the actual carrier, right? So you need to shake this up. All your paints you need to make sure are very well mixed, okay? But now that this is well mixed, we're good to go. Things like fluorescent paint and many other types of paint, you can't just put on the guitar. You have to have a base coat first. And the base coat is typically white. Sometimes it's black, but it's typically white. And because these are thin, and it needs something behind it that can, like, when the light goes through, it hits and it shines back out and it looks really nice and bright. If you just tried to paint this on something directly that was black, you really wouldn't see the blue the way it's supposed to. It really wouldn't stand out. And in fluorescent colors just like this one, the exact same thing. You have to have a white base coat. But once again, this is why you have to ask either the manufacturer or the person that you're buying the paint from about what typically do you have to do in order to apply this particular finish. They have things like metallic flakes that you have to have a special gun for. Sometimes they even have things that are glow in the dark, like different types of dusts and things like that. All of this stuff, you know, each type of paint that you're doing, you have to know exactly what material you need, how you go about doing it, the order, and also if you need any type of special tools for it, and also the settings of those tools, because you might have to change the air pressure or the amount of air that's actually coming through. It's not a one-stop shop type thing, one trick pony, whatever. Not one setting works for everything. Not one tool works for everything. Typically, when I'm dealing with just straight up paints and stuff like that, my gun will work just fine with the settings that I have. The only time I really need to change it is when I'm dealing with primers. But this, like I said, this is what I typically use for things like airbrushing. And the quart containers are typically what I end up using for the actual bodies and the base coats. Now, when you buy it in a quart, there's no solvent in it. There's no carrier. This is pure paint. Okay, this has solvent and carrier. The carrier already in it. It's very, very thin. So what would you thin something like this out with? Well, typically it's like a 2-to-1 ratio. Check on the box, it'll tell you, or check on the reducer, it'll tell you exactly how much you're supposed to mix reducer with your paint. Okay. But you can also thin it out a little bit more if you need to. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. What you end up getting is what's known as reducers, and this is, just think of it as a thinner, okay? And you'll see that this one will say medium reducer. You might find one that says slow, and you might see one that says fast. And basically what that means is how long does this stuff basically stick around before it evaporates. Think of it like that. A medium is something, and it's all based on basically the temperature, right, that you're working at. That's really what it is based on. So if you end up using something medium, if you live in an environment where the majority of the time you're dealing with temperatures, you know, between like 68 and 80 and stuff like that, medium is perfect, okay? If you're in an area that you're always in 105-degree weather and stuff like that, you know, you probably want to use slow. And if you're, you know, something that it's very, very cold, you want to use high. It's based on the temperature, really. And what you want is you want the paint to adhere to whatever that you're spraying on. If there's going to be any type of melting in between coats, you want that to happen, but then you don't want it to stay in this state of being wet and not really dry or not really cured for too long, because that can create runs. But if it dries too quickly, what ends up happening is you don't have a good adhesion, and it can also end up creating what they call like orange peel and bumps like that, because as soon as the stuff hits, it doesn't have time to really blend. It just immediately hardens kind of, and you're just sitting there and you have this rough finish, and it doesn't really look very nice. So you want to, once again, use the right amount. But you can change certain aspects of that by you know, thinning the paint a little bit more than it should be, and then that way you know for sure that it's going to have a chance to kind of smooth out, and you don't really want it to run. You want to get it to almost run, and if you can get it, if you can get it exactly where it's almost going to run, you end up with a very, very flat, smooth finish. But if it sets up too quickly and you didn't thin it correctly, you get this bump, like it's a very, very, very small bumpy surface, and it's orange peel. And it just takes time to figure this stuff out and to understand your tools and understand your paint and whatnot before you can really figure out all that stuff. There is a learning curve to painting, and you cannot get around it. You are going to mess up, okay? When you first start painting, you are going to mess up. And even with this video where I cover everything that you really kind of need to know, there's just no way of getting around it. Expect to mess up and practice on something other than your guitar before you actually start painting your guitar. Because if not, you're going to be doing a lot of sanding. Sometimes I do not even use this type of reducer. I'll just use acetone, depending on what I'm trying to do. Acetone evaporates extraordinarily fast. Now, these types of paints, these automotive paints that I was showing you, including the ones in the little bottles, those dry usually in under a minute. So by the time that I'm done spraying, a lot of times within 5 minutes it's ready for clear coat, right? Because it's already dry. Depends on how thick you put it on, depends on the weather and things like that and the reducers, but it dries very, very fast. And if, as long as it's somewhat set up, you can put your clear coat on pretty much right afterwards. You don't have to wait for it to completely dry before you put your clear on. And it's better for it to almost be completely dry or dry before you put your clear, so that way you can put your tack cloth and everything on there. But if you're in a very, very clean environment and you know beyond a shadow of a doubt there's nothing on there, you can put your clear on and the clear will melt into it, and it'll be okay. But if you do it too soon, it might not be a good idea, because the clear might actually start damaging the coat that you just put on. Once again, just follow the manufacturer's instructions until you get good at it, and then you can start playing around and experimenting in order to try to get the finish exactly how you want it and whatnot. When it comes to primers, I will use a polyester primer, and it'll come with, I think this is methyl ethyl ketone if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it is. And what you end up doing is you mix a few drops of this per ounce of primer. And the primer, once again, has to be stirred very, 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 very well. Very well. Because the pigments will go to the bottom of this. And you need to stir it very well until everything is nice and homogenized. Put the amount that you want. Use this. Go to the manufacturer's instructions once again. And you thin this. Right? This is not just straight into a thing, you put this and you're ready to roll. You thin this. You can use a reducer, you can use acetone or whatever, but follow the manufacturer's instructions. If you find that during the time that you're spraying, it doesn't really want to come out because it's too thick, pour it out, thin it out, put it back in. It's better to put 3 or 4 thin coats of primer on than to put one big, thick, nasty, clumpy primer on, right? When painting, it really is about patience, control, cleanliness, and thin coats, thin, even coats. Don't get into a rush. Do not get into a rush and try to get everything on in one coat. Typically, you'll end up messing everything up. When it comes to primer, sometimes you can get away with that, because this primer I also use as my grain filler. So sometimes I'll purposely put a bunch in one or two little areas and create a run. It doesn't make a difference, okay, because I'm going to sand it anyway. And when you're using primer, you can get away with stuff like that. But when it starts coming to your paint and your clear coat, absolutely not. And the clear coat is probably the most important, which we're going to get into right now. They have different types of clears. They have some that are matte finishes. They have some that are gloss and things like that. But urethane finishes. This is what I use, 2K speed urethane. And this is custom shop. You don't have to use this brand, okay? Some people will say you got to make sure that whatever paint you use, you need to make sure you use the same brand clear coat. That's sometimes true, but I have found that I can intermix custom shop as well as House of Color, and they work just fine. But with this, you're going to end up getting, just like the paint, you're going to have ratios that you mix. So something like this is like 4 to 1, okay? But you end up mixing this, like 4 parts this to 1 part hardener. Right? This by itself it's not good. You have to have your hardener, and they have different hardeners too. They have some that harden incredibly quickly, some that are just basic. This is a basic one right here. They also have ones. They have accelerants that can speed the process up. But just like everything else, you reduce this, and you try to get it to the consistency of for me, a thick water, like almost like a milk. Or maybe a little bit thicker, maybe like not quite half and half. But I want this to be fairly thin, because what I want is a very thin coat that does not run but covers the surface. When that becomes slightly tacky, I hit it again. When it becomes slightly tacky, I hit it again. And I'm layering it in this respect. If I try to put it all in one coat, I'm going to get drips. Okay? And one coat of this is really not enough. Okay, I'm going to say that again. One coat of this is not enough. 2 coats of this, you're pushing it. You need to do about 3 coats. Okay, because if not, when you start wet sanding and buffing, you're probably going to sand through it or you're going to buff through it. 1 coat, if you do it right, will look beautiful. Okay, but you might see a very, very small imperfections like that orange peel I was talking about in the finish. Many guitar manufacturers will leave it just that way and people are fine with it. But if you want a super glass-like looking finish, you got to wet sand and buff, okay? 3 coats minimum. 3 coats minimum, just remember that. And once again, manufacturer's instructions when it comes to the mixing of this stuff. This is probably the most poisonous of all the things that we have seen, right? It's more poisonous than the primer. It's more poisonous than the paint. This stuff is nasty. You have to wear your safety gear when using this. Make sure this stuff does not get in your eyes, right? Be very careful. Read the instructions to this. None of this stuff is a joke. I mean, this is some serious paint. You have to remember, this is the same stuff they put on automobiles, right? This isn't no Rust-Oleum or Krylon stuff that you get at Home Depot or Elmer's or whatever it is. This is the for real, like industrial kind of painting. And this stuff needs the proper safety gear and the proper consideration before you start using it. But as long as you're safe and you do everything right, you're going to have amazing results that are very durable and professional looking. What we have here is what's known as fadeaway, and this comes in a can. And this is basically just something that you would spray on if you're trying to repair something. Let's say, for instance, you ended up having to fix, you painted a guitar body and there was one portion that you kind of had to sand a little bit, hit it with an airbrush and put your clear back on. What you want to do is after you're done putting your clear back on, you take this, you give it a quick gentle spray, and what it does is it allows the clear coat to kind of stay solventy a little bit longer so it can melt into the other clear coat. Because remember, we're dealing with urethanes here, and it's not the same thing as a lacquer. A lacquer will just melt into it and you won't be able to see where one layer goes into the next. When you're dealing with urethanes, you do. And this fadeaway right here will help cause that melting to happen, so that way it's harder to tell where these layers kind of go into one another. This is a must if you're repairing very dark guitars. Dark guitars like black guitars are murder, right? They are the worst guitars to have to wet sand and buff. They are the worst. Every single flaw will show up in a black guitar. White guitars and light colored ones are beautiful, right? Because you can get away with a lot of error. No one will ever see it. Dark guitars, on the other hand, you can forget it. You will not get away with anything. Everything has to be perfect. And if you have to do a repair on a black guitar, you need something like this. Once again, you can get this at places that do automotive painting. So what we have here are a few guitar bodies that have been primed. This has had 3 coats of primer on it. And after every single time that you end up giving it a coat of primer, you have to give it a really good look over to make sure that everything is just right, because any errors that are in this primer are going to show up in the final result. And let me see if I can, right here. And we're going to use 220 grit on this. And I'm going to try to show you a couple things, and hopefully you'll be able to see them. But when I get this, right here, I don't know if you can see that, it doesn't look too good. So what I would do is I would come in here and I would gently try to knock these things down and take any small little imperfections out of the primer. Okay? When sanding your primer, you also, or even clear coat for that matter, you have to be very careful around the edges, because the edges are going to be the very first thing that you will sand through. Okay? And this is where you would have your compressor and you'd blow that off. Okay, now by doing that, I fixed a couple of spots. I have to work right here a little bit more, and I have to definitely work right here. Now this is primer, this is not wood, so you can sand in any direction that you want in order to accomplish your goal. Okay, if you sand through it, you need to put another coat of primer on it. Okay? So far that's looking a lot better. We have a section right here that needs to be hit also. I'm going to do that a little bit later, but I want to go through and I want to look at every aspect of this. There's very, very small little edges right here and dimples that need to come out. You have to look at this almost like under a microscope. Okay? Now you'll see I started sanding through. This is the edge. This I'm going to probably have to hit with another coat of primer after I'm done sanding it. But you'll find things just like up in this area, things like that. That got missed. I didn't see it. Okay? But if I put a very thick coat of primer on there, it'll actually fill that up and I can sand it and we won't see it. So that's one example. Here is an example of an Orion that is going to be a white Orion, and you'll see that in this area there is a lot of primer. I did that on purpose because I wanted to fill up some gaps similar to the one that I just showed you. Okay, now primer sands very easy. Okay, so it's not like you're going to be sitting here for days trying to smooth this out and make everything look perfect. You'll see that that section is already finished. I just have to hit this now. Okay, I did that there, there, and here. Okay, I also did it in this area and in this area. And it looks messy, but it was actually done on purpose. Right here we can see that the exact same thing happened right here and right here. Okay, that's okay to do. Okay, there's also a section that's right here. That is okay to do. You're going to sand this. Okay, and I do this actually a lot. If during the time that I'm painting I see something that kind of needs to be covered up because I missed it during the time that I was using Bondo, or in some cases, even though it's rare, grain filler, I'll end up spraying this on real heavy and then sanding it, and then it acts as the grain filler. Okay. When everything is said and done, though, you should have a perfectly flat, even surface, and there should be no errors in it. Let's look at another example. Okay, right here we have a flying V that I'm building. We can see right here, oh, okay, that wasn't sticking, but we can see right here there was something that I had to spray. This is the perfect time to go ahead and use a sanding block. So what we'll do is we'll come back over here, we'll grab our 220, place it on here, and now I'm just going to focus on this one area. And once again, you'll see that I'm kind of going all over the place. And now this is perfectly flat, okay? It's perfectly straight. This portion looks great. This portion does not. I sanded through. I'm going to have to put another coat of primer on, but I also see an area right here that the last coat was thin and it didn't really quite cover. I'm also seeing this right here where it looks like there was some chip out, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of Bondo right there, and then that way when I prime this again, that will be covered up. Coming in here on some of the sides where it's got a rough texture, I'm going to come in and just use my finger to try to smooth this out. And you'll see this primer comes off very easy. That's one of the reasons why I love using this particular primer, because it doesn't take long to do all the sanding. Okay, but this is good. Now, one of the things, I'm going to end up sanding this a little bit later. There's no reason for you to watch me sand a bunch of guitars. You may be tempted to want to use something like a random orbital sander. Depending on what you're doing, maybe if it's the very first coat and you're kind of using it as grain filler, you can do that. But as you start getting further and further along, closer to the actual paint, don't do that. Okay, it's too easy to go through all of the primer, and also it can leave like little dimples and stuff if you're not really good with the sander. So let's also look at this, what I have right here. This is just a block of wood that I have another stick coming through it, and I glued it, and I have a screw going through the rear. But what I do is I put 2 screws inside here into the pickup area, so that way, because this guitar gets painted all the way around, and I can hold this and I can paint this, and I don't really have to worry about ever touching the guitar anywhere. And then I hang it up through one of these tuning holes. But that's what this is for. When looking at something like this, just a body, you'll see that I have a block of wood. That's my handle, 2 screws into it. Right here, don't know if you can see that. That's horrible, but it looks like it was done on purpose. So once again, I come in and I sand. And after everything looks just right, your final coat of primer only has to be thick enough to make it where you can't see anything underneath it. It doesn't have to be, because the last coat you don't really want to have to sand if you don't have to. The first 2 coats, maybe 3 coats, that is all about making sure that the guitar looks perfect for your paint. Okay, the more accurate and the better you can make your guitar look before you prime it, the less you have to do what I'm doing here. But sometimes you're going to miss things. Okay, sometimes you're going to miss them, and that's okay. But after your first coat of primer, you sand it. You try to look for anything that's wrong. Hit it with the second coat. Sometimes the second coat's enough, and that's that. Sometimes you have to do a third coat. And also, sometimes you don't really have to do a complete third coat. You only have to do it in one section and say, there we go, we're good. But your priming has to be done. It has to look perfect before you put any paint on at all. So I spent some time doing some sanding on this, and you'll see that I ended up going through trying to, because this is acting kind of like a grain filler. I sanded down to as far as I could go. One more coat of primer will take care of that. I came over here and we can see little pieces, like little gaps, little things here, okay, that need to also be sanded. Okay, one more coat of primer will take care of that. We've got some like little pieces right here. One more coat of primer will take care of that. But we've got some big ones right here. These, I'm going to end up actually using a little bit of Bondo right there. Okay, right here I can see like a dimple. Okay, and it's hard for you to probably see because this is white, and black primer would show it much better on the camera. Right now I don't have any black guitars primed for me to show you, but I can see a little dimple right here. That I should probably also Bondo. I could probably use primer on that. But this is exactly what you do. You go through, this is actually 2 coats of primer on this one. So the 3rd coat should fix it. And just anywhere that I see a dimple or anything like that that looks like, I don't know if primer is going to be enough, I'll put Bondo on there. And from there I can sand the Bondo, hit it with primer, and then we'll be ready to paint. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mix up some paint here. What I've done is on this Kramer-like body, I went ahead and I sanded it. I put Bondo where I needed to put Bondo, and because I'm actually going to end up painting this black, I could have used black primer. Okay, it's not going to really make a difference. Originally I was going to paint this a different color, but I decided I was going to actually end up doing realistic flames on this. And for realistic flames, I need to have a black background. So I have my mixing cup here, and I'm going to mix enough up that I can get a coat over the entire guitar here, and that will be maybe a couple ounces. What we'll do is we'll get this guy, and I'll go ahead and I'll pour about 2 ounces of this in here. Actually, I think I'm only going to pour an ounce. So we have an ounce of triple deep black right here. Okay. Close that up a little bit later on down the line. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add what I need to as far to as thinning this out. So I'm using the medium reducer, and I'm going to be adding half of an ounce to that. Okay, and this might be enough paint to paint that guitar. So now I'm going to stir this guy up, and like I was mentioning before, you want to make sure that you run this through a filter. You don't want to just pour this in there. So now I've grabbed the gun here. Make sure there's nothing inside here. Grab it, pour this in. Okay. Now, typically I spray this in a spray booth, but I can't put the camera inside the spray booth. So we're going to have to do this kind of out in the open here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this gun, and I'm going to take it over to a large cardboard box so I can show you about setting it up, doing a couple of practice runs, and then we can go ahead and spray the guitar. Okay, so what I've done right here is I'm just kind of giving it a couple of hits. That is too thin. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this part back a little bit so a little bit more paint comes out. I was adjusting this right now to tighten the pattern up a little bit. I'm also going to end up, this is too low of air. That's not bad. So that's where I'm going to keep it as far as air. I can also adjust the air from this if you end up installing one of these. But that's pretty good. Now when spraying, you don't want to hold it at an angle like this. You want to kind of hold at a right angle to whatever surface that you're working on. Okay? And you also don't want to stay in one spot for too long because you'll end up getting drips. You also, when you start, you don't want to aim at what you're painting, then start. You want to kind of start and then bring it to what you're painting. That will help prevent runs and things like that. So let me grab the guitar body, and because I ended up doing some tests, I might have to mix up some more paint, but I'm going to get the guitar body and we can start painting this. So what I do is I hit the face of this a couple of times, trying to get a thin coat. At this point, you know, you could use a tack cloth if you want, okay? But basically we start here. And you'll notice that I'm not trying to get a perfectly complete coat right now. Now I'm going to hit the sides. Come in here. Okay, so that's the first run, and now I'm going to do the exact same thing again. Now at this point, I'm going to look over this guitar really well to make sure I haven't missed anything, and then I'm going to hit it one more time. And the sound that you're hearing is simply because this is a poorly made gun. Okay, I could probably adjust this to get that whine to disappear, but the whine is just annoying and it doesn't do anything to the finish. So I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, and I think I'm out of paint again. But the important thing is the guitar is completely painted, and I'm looking right now to make sure nothing was missed. Okay, you might see some scratches from when you did some sanding. That's okay. When you put the clear on, it'll disappear. If you look at this, you can kind of see there's like an orange peel to it. That will disappear when you put your clear on. The important thing is you have complete coverage, and looking at this, it looks like there's complete coverage. Now I'm going to go ahead and hang this up. In 25 minutes this will be dry enough for me to actually go to the next step. The next step, if I wanted to, I could clear coat it or whatever. And the clear coat, you do the exact same thing that we just did here. The only difference is you do it with the clear. You know, you do one coat thin, you kind of let it set up just a little bit, you hit it again, right? You hit it again, and you want to put about 3 coats of clear on. And then afterwards, the clear, you'll end up seeing very similar things to it. You'll see the slight orange peel, but that's what the wet sand and the buff is for. Now during the time that that's drying, I'm going to end up taking my acetone and I'm going to end up cleaning out the gun. This paint dries extraordinarily fast, and you don't want any of this to be inside, no residual paint. So every time you're done spraying and you know you're going to be spending a few minutes doing something else, clean your gun. So we have our clear coat here, and I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to end up pouring about maybe 1.5 ounces of clear. Okay, closing that up, and this is a 4-to-1 ratio. Okay, so I have to add right around that, and then now we're going to stir this up real well. But before we do, I want to make sure that this is thin enough that it goes on without too much texture. So I'm going to add just a touch of reducer. Okay, you should follow the instructions of the manufacturer on how you should mix this stuff, what ratios, etc. Okay, I was starting to eat away on my eraser. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, and just like we did before, we're going to put in our strainer, pour it in our gun,
and take this back over to where we were working earlier so we can give this guitar a nice little click. You know, ordinarily this would be inside my spray room, but I can't put the camera in the spray room, so we kind of have to do it like this. But just like we were painting, what we're going to do is we're going to do a thin coat. We want to test to make sure that the right amount is coming out, and then we're going to hit it just like we did the paint. Okay, that's the first coat. Now we're going to hit it with the second coat. And so that's after 2 thin coats, okay? This I'm going to let set up for about 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm going to hit it again with maybe 1 or 2 more coats, and then we will be golden, okay? And then we'll, after this sets up and it cures, we'll be able to go ahead and wet sand and buff this guy probably in about 4 hours, okay? So the next step after this, maybe 2 more coats, because we want to make sure that it's thick, and we want to make sure that when we do our wet sanding and buffing, we don't go through it. And from there, wet sand and buff. Okay, so what I have here is a guitar body that I'm purposely going to mess up. I don't care really what happens with this guitar body. There was a chip that ended up happening up here, and I could probably save it, but whatever, right? There's some things that went wrong with this particular body. This is actually a body that was an apprentice's first body. He got close, not quite right. But if you look, you'll see that this is not perfectly like glass. It's not perfectly flat. You can see little orange peel effect. You can see how it's not perfectly flat, right? Now, some people consider this just fine, and they'd be perfectly fine with this kind of finish. But to me, it looks really raw. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look right. And so, in order for us to get this to look real nice, we have to wet sand and buff. Now, as mentioned before, I'm going to be using a foam block, and I'm going to be using 1500 grit. Okay. Now, usually, what I'll do is I will soak both of these, in a container of water for maybe 15-20 minutes, and then I'll start using it, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to do it off camera. And then afterwards, it'll be ready to actually start wet sanding and buffing. Some people will put a drop of dish soap inside that water to kind of help act as a lubricant. You can do that if you want. I find that it's not completely necessary, but you can do it if you want. You need to have water with you throughout the whole time that you're doing this process, because it's going to want to dry up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand a few spots, and then in other areas I'm going to sand too much, so you can see what happens when you go through the clear. And then when I start doing the buffing, I'm going to buff one area correctly, and then I'm going to buff another area incorrectly, so you can see what happens if you buff incorrectly. Okay, so we've got some wet sandpaper here, and I'm going to start working in this section. Okay, now you can go in a circular motion like this if you want, but you have to be careful. You have to be very mindful during the time that you are sanding, okay? Now, it's important to know what direction you're sanding based on how you're planning on buffing this, okay? Because when we get ready to buff, since right now I'm sanding this direction, I actually want to have the buffing wheel this way. I don't want the buffing wheel this way. It'll buff much better if it's at a right angle to what I'm sanding. So depending on some sections of the guitar, I'll actually purposely go in an opposite direction, because I know that's how I have to hold the guitar body during the time that I'm doing the buffing. But you'll see that this is 1500 grit. I'll only rarely go lower than this, and that's only if there's like a big drip or something that I have to get through, okay? But at this point it's starting to kind of gum up a little bit. So it would be time for me to clean this and put some dip this back in water. So here's a towel. You can use a rag, okay? But I'm wiping that up. And after wiping that up, as soon as some of this water evaporates, you'll be able to see the area that the orange peel is gone. You'll be able to see areas around in here where it's kind of heavy. You'll see areas like right here that still have little bumps, areas like this that still have little bumps, areas like this that still have little bumps. And your goal is to make everything look foggy and perfectly flat. Let me move the camera a little bit so you can see exactly what I'm talking about here. So this area, okay, this area looks good. This part right here looks good. When we buff that, it's going to look like glass. This area, not good. So this is an area that we would need to focus on, okay? Areas like this too, we have to look at all this. Everything should look, after you're done wet sanding, everything should look perfectly gray and flat with no little bumps in it, okay? So let's come over here and hit this section. I'm going in a direction that is different, but because of the way that I'm going to be doing the buffing, you'll understand why I'm going this direction, okay? But you want the entire guitar to look gray and flat with no bumps, because it'll make a huge difference on the final product. Okay? A lot of times you can tell when it's flat because of the way that the sandpaper feels when it goes over the surface. Okay? Let's wipe this up. Give it a second for that water to go away. And we're getting closer. These little sections like this, we have to hit that. Kind of looks like there might be something over in, let me see, maybe not. We have to have that water kind of disappear. So this whole section is right. This is correct. Right here, there's small little dots. That has to be taken care of. Okay? But you'll see this is what you have to do. You go over it. And once again, like I said, I use 1500 grit. Some people will start at 800 grit, then they'll go to like 1000, they'll go to 1200, and then 1500, they'll go to 2000. It's not really necessary. You can, the 800 is just it'll leave too many scratches. And you want to, on a black guitar, everything shows up. Every little scratch shows up. Let's take some sandpaper and see if we can go through the clear here. And so that way you know exactly what that looks like. To me, this is absolutely taboo, what I'm about to do. But we have some 600 grit right here, okay? Let me turn the guitar. We'll end up spraying this section. Okay. And I'm going to see if I can go through the clear on this. If you only put one coat of clear, maybe 2 coats of clear, there's a very good chance you're going to sand through the finish. This one, from what I remember, might have a lot of coats of clear, and it might take a little bit of work for me to go through it. But I'm going to see if I can sand through it. Many times when you sand through your clear coat, what you'll do is you'll see layers of the urethane. You'll see layers of the clear coat. You can't buff those out. No matter what you do, it just doesn't work. You have to spray another coat of clear on those in order for that stuff to kind of melt into one another, and from there do another wet sand and buff. I'm not sure if I sanded through the clear on that. There might be a lot on there. There's a lot of clear coat on this. I couldn't even sand through that, I don't think, because I'm not seeing where one ties into the other. Right here, right there. Okay, I did sand through the clear coat. After the water evaporated, we can see it. Do you see this line that kind of goes like that? That's 2 layers. We can also kind of see it like right here. Okay. We went through the top layer. We're at a second layer. Okay. If we try to buff this out, this line would show up. It would look foggy. okay? So you have to be really careful when you're doing your sanding on your clear, because this type of stuff does happen. And on a black guitar, you can't buff that out. You're going to always see it. It's going to look horrible. On a white guitar or something very light colored, a lot of times you can get away with it. Not on this type, okay? So let's go ahead and start talking a little bit about buffing, because now we've gotten to the point where we know what we're doing as far as the wet sanding, what the end result should kind of look like. You can take this up to like 1200 grit if you want. I mean, not 1200, but 2000 grit if you want. I just don't think that it's necessary. I find 1500 is good enough. Okay, so buffing really is kind of like a form of heated sanding in a way. And you end up getting different types of buffing compounds. And you'll see that, well, on this one we can see it, like on this particular one. It tells you what the finish is, right? Strong cut, polishing, intensive, final, super finish. And it's basically, think of it like sandpaper, right? The strong cut is something that has got it's a lot grittier, right? That might be closer to an 800 grit sandpaper. When we start coming up more and more and more, we start getting into something that might be closer to a 2500 grit sandpaper. And that's what, but this stuff is kind of almost like a hardened Play-Doh. It can be a little soft. This particular one right here is actually very hard and it broke in half, but this is a rough cut. This is for polishing things. I use something like this, the rough cut, for things like doing my frets, like when I'm polishing my frets and stuff, or anything metal, really. I use the rough cuts for that type of stuff. This is what I use for my paint, and this is the SF, which is the super finish. Okay, this is basically the finest you can use, but they do have different types of compounds for different sections of your buffing. In other words, you sanded this with 800 grit. You start with the rough cut, then you go to the next thing, and then you go to the next one and next one, and eventually you get to this. To me, it's too many. It's too many steps. It's just too much work. Just do 1500 grit and this, and it'll work, and you get close enough. During the time that you generally will on your buffing wheel, you're going to end up usually having like two wheels, like one on each side, and you don't want to intermix compounds. As soon as you on one of your wheels, as soon as you use like something like this is the only one that you use for it. Okay, you don't want to change them back and forth, because as time goes by, those wheels will start accumulating this compound, and you might end up getting, instead of something being a super finish, it might end up being closer to something like a polish or something, and not be able to really give you that polish that you're looking for, that finish that you're looking for. So let's go ahead and look at the buffing wheel. We'll look at the buffer, and we'll kind of go over this, and we'll go over how to buff. So right here we've got some cotton buffing wheels. Okay, this is the way that they're manufactured. This is for the final finish. This is what I'm going to be using for my body. Okay, over here you can't really see it as well, but this is a different type of buffing wheel. It's much denser. It's stronger. This is what I use for my frets when I'm polishing my frets and things like that. If I was going to be doing rough cuts, I would use something like this if I was going to do rough cuts on my paint. But I think this is way too aggressive, and it increases the chances of me burning through my finish. This one is softer, and it decreases the chance of me burning through my finish. During the time that this is spinning, okay, let's say it's going in this direction right here, okay, it's going to want to grab and throw. And you have to be careful on where you're placing your wood, right? And you have to be careful about sharp angles. Okay, like here's a piece. Okay, here's a piece of walnut. If I'm sitting here and I'm buffing this, and I'm buffing it like this, I'm safe. Nothing's going to happen. But if I turn this and it hits like this, it's going to grab the wood and throw it.
Okay, you have to always be very, very careful and conscious of exactly what's going on, and you know, you want to buff off of the surface, not on it. In other words, if I needed to buff this area right here, I wouldn't come up and try to buff it like this. I would turn this upside down, and I'm buffing away from it. I'm buffing off of it, okay? That would buff it like that. The side, I could hold like this, okay? Sometimes you can hold it at an angle, okay? But always be aware that anytime that you have a right angle to this, it could grab and throw your work. And if it throws, and it's happened, you throw a guitar and you have to sand it, paint it, everything, because it dents and all this other stuff, you have to put Bondo and start over again. You got to be really careful. So it's always buffing off of the surface. So once again, this area, you want to buff like this. You would not want to buff like this, okay? You're just asking for it. It also will build up a lot of heat. The buffing wheel will build up a lot of heat, and when it starts building up heat, it can burn through your clear coat, okay? And you have to avoid that. And the best way to do it, well, you have to practice a lot. You have to know exactly how hard you should be pushing against it, as well as how long you should keep it in one area, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to load up this wheel. And so I've got my buffing compound, and I'm pushing it into that wheel. I want that wheel to be impregnated with the buffing compound. So now I have my guitar, and I'm going to be holding it very tight. Just, I don't want this to get thrown at all, okay? You're dealing with a lot of speed here. That's another thing. You want to make sure that your wheel does not go too fast. This buffer has two settings. I have it set on the lowest setting. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up, and you'll see I'm buffing off of the guitar. I'm buffing away from the guitar, okay? And I'm moving it back and forth. I may be putting a pound or 2 pounds of pressure on the actual wheel itself. Now, when it comes time to this, trim cavity, I have to be careful, because if I come in and I try to buff that, it's going to want to grab. It'll tear off paint, it'll melt paint, and it'll want to throw the guitar. So what I do is I turn it upside down, and then I buff, once again, off of the surface. Like that. And what it does is it protects that area, and I don't have to worry about that getting damaged, okay? But during the time that you're buffing, you want to keep looking at the area that you're buffing, okay? Because even though it might look shiny, the reality is there's little scratches inside in that finish. And so during the time, I'm going to keep lifting this up, and I'm going to hold it to the light, and I'm going to see if there's any scratches that haven't come out, and there's tons that have not come out. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to purposely burn through the finish right now, so you can see what that looks like. So I'm turning this up full blast, which is actually scary. I'm going to see if I can burn through this. Okay, I burned through it. That actually looks kind of cool, but that's what happens when you burn through it. I went incredibly too fast on that wheel, too much pressure, and it burned through. Now this particular guitar, the clear coat is well cured, and because of that, it's going to be very difficult for me to burn through it with something like this, unless I spend probably 2 or 3 minutes in one spot. When the finish is not perfectly clear, perfectly cured, in other words, it's only maybe a day old or something, or a few hours old, it's much easier to burn through, much easier. I could easily burn through it with this, okay? But this finish has been on here for probably a good 6 to 7 months. It's fully cured. So now let's look at the difference between what we had before, which was this weird rough looking stuff right here, and this. How this is definitely more reflective and shiny.
it's just a nicer, better finish, okay? We can also see how horrible burning through is, okay? And if we look real close, okay, we can see this area would have to be buffed more, right? Hopefully you can see that. I mean, it would need to be sanded too, but we could see that this needs to be buffed more. This section looks really nice though, this part right here. When I start looking closer, I can actually see hairline scratches. And then so what I would do is I would want to buff at a right angle to those scratches, and it would take those out. But this is a huge difference compared to, you know, how this is. I mean, look at that. That's horrible, orange peel. But look at that. Okay? Big difference. Hopefully you can see that. There's a huge learning curve when it comes to buffing. Okay? You got to practice. Expect to have things thrown out of your hand. Expect to have things break. Be careful when you're doing it. You're dealing with a high-speed rotating wheel there, right? It ain't no joke. You want to wear a dust mask, things like that. But you're going to burn through your finish, right? You're going to make mistakes. You're going to mess up. You're going to probably damage a guitar body. It's always good to practice on something first. Get used to it. Also, depending on your buffer, right? Your buffing wheel size, all sorts of stuff. The thickness of the buffing wheel, all sorts of things like that. You have to kind of find the right settings, right? I mean, for my particular buffer, I have to set it to the lowest setting, and I can't put any more than two soft pads on one side if I want to try to get the results that I want. If I put more than two, then on one side, what happens is it ends up slowing down the buffer too much, and it doesn't create the heat and the friction that's needed in order to buff out the clear coat. If I only had one, it would be too much, and then it would increase the chances of me burning through. So the settings of the buffer are really, really important, and the only way to really figure that out is really just experimenting, testing, knowing your gear. You know, experiment on other things that don't matter before you take the guitar that does matter to that guitar. I mean, to that buffer. Also keep in mind that lacquer buffs differently than urethanes, right? Lacquer is, you can't stay in one spot for too long. It'll want to burn through much, much faster. You have to move quickly. And you'll see that depending on the speed of the buffer, depending on all sorts of things, your technique is going to change. You know, you might hold it against your body and be moving at a rate like this, okay, on some finishes, and then on others you might be doing something like this, okay. It just depends. You need to know your finish, you need to know your gear, everything along those lines. But after you finally get where you can do you know, your buffing and you're comfortable with it, you're going to be like so happy that you know how to do it, because everything is going to look like glass afterwards, and people are going to always be impressed with your finishes. Just keep in mind, once again, your wet sanding, you know, make sure you do the wet sanding correctly. Also make sure you put a thick enough clear coat on there, right? Because if it's too thin, you're going to burn through or you're going to sand through. And then also remember that the longer the clear coat sets and cures, the less chance of you actually burning through, right? Anyway, guys, that is my video on painting and wet sanding and buffing and finishing your guitar. There's so much more I could talk about and go over and show, but this video is already getting to become very, very large, and I'll probably have to do another video showing advanced painting and finishing techniques and airbrushing and things like that. There currently is another video that's available for download that's how to paint realistic flames, where I go over the techniques of painting true fire and realistic flames. That is available for download too. Very soon I will have some more videos up and available, and they will be covering all the other things that we haven't already talked about in these other videos. So until next time, guys, this is William Gelvin. Take care.